Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what sort of criteria we should be using to determine if an exercise is a particularly good or useful exercise. Now, when I say this, it doesn't mean that a person should never do any exercise that doesn't meet any of these criteria. It just means that these exercises are going to be generally more useful, and they're probably the entirety of what most people should be doing at least their first year in the gym. Meaning these are the exercises that give you the most bang for your buck. They're not specialized on weak points and things like that, because none of that stuff exists in people who've been training less than a year. In fact, I'd say in some cases, unless a person has been training hard at least 2 or 3 years, they probably don't have any weak points. Their entire body's a weak point. And what we need to remember is that for almost everyone who gets into training, the reasons you lift weights are to gain muscle and gain strength. That's it. That's the entirety of it. Even if your goals are fat loss or to improve its sports from it, it still falls back to those things, because the work capacity and metabolism the muscle gives you helps you lose fat more quickly. It raises your metabolic rate. The work capacity increase of it will help you burn more calories when doing cardio and everything else. So even if your goal is fat loss, your goal should be to gain muscle as rapidly as possible, right? And that should just be common sense if you understand physiology. Same thing for using it for sports purposes. The more muscle and strength that you can gain quickly, the better you're going to be at running, jumping, swimming, riding your bike, all that other stuff, because you're going to improve your work capacity. So our criteria is going to be to determine if an exercise is good or not is how many muscles does it work at one time. In other words, how many joints actually move directly, and then how many other joints and muscles are used to help stabilize, so getting further indirect work. And that's what you need to look at first of all. In other words, the more compound or more multi-joint an exercise is, probably the better that exercise is. Now, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, what about isolation? What about curls? What about side laterals? Well, here's the question I would ask you. Why does a person who doesn't need to specialize ever need to isolate a muscle? If your goal is to increase size and strength as quickly as possible, why would you ever want to train just a single muscle? There's not been a single study, and believe me guys, there have been dozens, if not hundreds of studies that looked at this. There's not been one that has ever shown that novices gain any more muscle from doing isolation work. So let that sink in. And novices, meaning you've been training really hard less than a year, you're a novice. Not been one study showing that they gain any muscle by adding isolation work in. None. So why would you bother? What's the point? Because you want to do it for fun? Well, that's okay. Doesn't make it a good exercise just because you enjoy doing it. So we need to look at multiple joints involved. And what I would say to most people, for the overwhelming majority of you, you may not ever reach a point in your life where you only have one muscle on your entire body that you want to improve. For example, we could argue about doing an overhead press versus a tricep extension, because you want to bring your triceps up, but if your deltoids are not perfect and your traps and your delts are not completely 100% at the size that you want them to be 6 months from now or a year from now, why wouldn't you just do an overhead press instead of a tricep extension? You have 2 muscles or 3 muscles that could all be improved that you want to improve by the same exercise. So again, kind of becomes silly at a certain threshold. So that's kind of the point we get to, is how many joints are involved. The more, the better. Because the more muscles that are involved, and the more muscles involved in the work, the more strength you're going to gain, the more muscle mass you're going to gain from training. You're going to get better exercise economy. Number 2, we need to look at which exercises allow you to move more weight through an effective range of motion. And I don't mean moving more weight because you reduce range of motion, right? If you can pull 10 pounds more on a sumo deadlift versus a conventional, that doesn't make it a better exercise if you're doing so at the expense of range of motion, right? Because a longer range of motion usually produces slightly more strength and slightly more muscle growth. And it tends to be better for overall joint health. So you get a lot of benefits out of a longer range of motion, and obviously more weight Again, produces more strength, more muscle mass. So that's what we need to be looking at. What are we doing there? And I'll give you a perfect example of range of motion and muscles involved. Let's compare two exercises. How about a seated barbell press versus a standing barbell press? Which one of those involves more muscles? The standing, obviously, right? A lot of people aren't aware that it allows for a slightly longer range of motion that involves more muscles also. See, that's the interesting thing. When we get into compound movements, when we start trimming ranges of motion out, sometimes we get less muscles involved. And that's a perfect example. By standing, we can train a lot of the core, can't we? The standing version of it, you tend to be able to train your entire core. Obliques, abs, all of that. So you get this extra work there, but people say, well, I'm training it for my shoulder girdle and upper chest and triceps. Well, that's fine, but you can get some free core work with it also. So you've got that to consider. And then how about the fact that if you look at the bar paths, usually a seated press works the front delts and chest and triceps almost exclusively. We've got EMG studies on this because of the fact that you can lean back and get all the chest recruitment because of the longer range of motion of the bottom, just like you can seated. You get the upper chest involvement, but because you're standing and it allows you to throw the bar behind your head more, and it allows you to press it back more, which is actually a slightly longer range of motion, because your ability to move your head and torso, it works the rear and side delts more, and it works the triceps more. That extra little range of motion added by the ability to move it that way brings more muscles in, and they light up a lot more on an EMG. So that's a perfect example of comparing two exercises. How about we compare something like a front squat and a back squat? Similar range of motion, you could move more weight on a back squat. Does that mean the front squat's not a good exercise? No, front squat's a very good exercise for a lot of sport-specific applications. Not as good for overall muscle and strength as a back squat. Doesn't mean it's not a good exercise. It just means for general buildup, general buildup, and the people who need to build a base still, people who have non-advanced goals, who aren't advanced lifters yet, back squat's probably a better exercise. Just like the standing press is a better exercise to the seated one. And that's the thing that we come to. As far as a lot of this goes, what we mean by the most muscles involved, you know how you get the most muscles involved? Exercises that either require you to stand on your feet and thus you have the ability to fall down, or exercises that move your body through space. So ideally, what we are looking for there, and that will, by the way, remove virtually every single machine exercise you'll ever do, right? And most isolation movements, because they just don't work as many total stabilizers. You get more muscles involved when you move the body through space, and that's another one too. Compare what we've seen in biomechanics and EMG looking at a chin-up versus a lat pull-down. Yeah, they work the biceps, the rear delts, the traps, the lats, all that stuff, both of them do, right? The chin-up works, in addition to those things, it works more abdominal. It works the upper chest, the pectoralis minor. It works the long head of the triceps more. All these other secondary muscles get worked more because it moves your body through space. Moves the body through space. And it allows, again, for a very long range of motion. That's a long range of motion exercise if done correctly. So here is what I would say is your criteria for determining what the best exercises are for you to do. And again, this should be for novices, this should be all you do. And more advanced lifters, these exercises should always be the foundation of your training. It's just that when you get more advanced, I understand you have weak points you need to train. But 80 to 90% of what you do should still fall in these categories. And they're going to be exercises that allow you to use the most joints possible, to move the heaviest weight possible through the furthest effective and safe range of motion that you can do. That's what you're looking for, is the perfect exercises. With the added clause that if it's an exercise that either moves the body through space or in which you have the ability to fall down while doing it, that those are the exercises that are going to bring even more muscles into play. And therefore, they're going to be overall more efficient and more effective exercises for adding muscle mass and strength to your body. And those are the only two reasons for which we ever lift weights. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.